Hi, I'm Johanna Weaver, and you're listening to Tech Mirror, a podcast that talks about how humans shape technology and how technology is shaping our society. Hello and welcome to Tech Mirror. Today, we are bringing out the big guns. My guest is Gina Cass-Gottlieb. She's the chair of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission and arguably one of Australia's most powerful regulators. Gina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Johanna. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Thank you. We are too. We're going to start with a little bit of a softball question for you, which is you started in your role just over a year ago. And before that, you were a lawyer. You were a founding partner of the competition and regulation practice at Gilbert and Tobin. So what's it been like swapping sides, I guess? And I've heard you described as poacher turned gamekeeper. Is that an analogy that resonates with you?
While, yes, much of my work was corporate related work, I also acted for industry associations looking to shape new regulatory frameworks. I also acted for government, and I've now for 10 years been on the Payment System Board as a regulator of access in, as you would know well, Joanna, sort of fast-moving technological development in payments. So I always had a broader view and a mixed engagement with these questions. And so it is a marvellous opportunity to be now sitting in the table at a time of such change with a remarkable team, able to actually be fully informed, focused on key questions and able to take them forward.
Yeah. One of the things we grapple with a lot at the Tech Policy Design Centre, but also on this podcast, is how do we equip and upskill policymakers and regulators to know enough about technology to be able to make good policy and to be able to make good regulatory decisions? How have you worked to understand the technology throughout your career? Because it's something that we grapple with a lot.
In private practice, I kept informed really by keeping close to industry and seeing what was changing and understanding what they were working on, and also engaging with universities and expert researchers who were looking to it. At the Commission, we have a much deeper capability to do this. Firstly, we have brought our own internal tech expertise, strategic data analytical, but in addition, using new tools, new software tools, new platforms in order to be able to inform the way we work, but also in order to see horizon scan as to what is happening. So it is a conscious and intentional part of the way we engage with these issues. We also get briefings from industry, from users, from consumers who are worried about development, consumer advocates who are worried about development. So it allows us to have a real breadth of input, which is much more than I was accessing when I was trying in private practice to keep basically up with what was happening and drawing on it. We are doing that in a very intentional, investing in it way here at the ACCC.
Traditionally, people think that government has less access to expertise for technologists because of the fact that many of these technologists work in industry. So it's really, I guess, heartening to hear you say that expertise you feel you have more access to within the ACCC than you did within private practice. Do you think it is possible for the ACCC to keep pace with the rate of change that's happening?
I think regulators can keep pace and regulation must keep pace. So that when we look at how can regulators do it, so part of it is a commitment to it, and the ACCC moved in a very forward way. So in 2017 to then produce the first digital platforms inquiry report in 2019, actually one of the first ones globally, which led to the News Bargaining Code, but was informed by a wide breadth of review of impacts. So there is an advantage in starting at a time and then keeping committed to looking to developments. It does not mean that we can keep across every development in the same depth. We can't. However, we do a mixture of a breadth of keeping across key developments. So each meeting of the relevant team that we have, including with the commissioners who engage with particularly digital platform and tech questions, we do a horizon scanning across key technical developments that have come since the last meeting and key regulatory developments, since a lot of change and proposals are happening internationally. And then we focus where we are having the greatest concerns about potential consumer harms and competition harms. So it's a combination. How can we do it? I'm not suggesting we can keep across the depth of every development in every possible technical application, but we keep that mixture of across the top to make sure we are seeing where change is occurring, and then very focused attention in the areas where we see the most concerns developing from an Australian regulatory point of view. Just moving to my must, it's why we have so strongly emphasised the value of having targeted service-specific codes. And first of all, the government, which is still considering the recommendations from our last year September regulatory reform recommendations, but we are proposing in consumer a set of really clear safeguards apply to every platform to protect against scams, harmful apps, misleading reviews, and for mandatory dispute resolution processes. So that we're saying cover it, provide safety net and clear safeguards, because consumers currently are facing real harms. But in the competition recommendations, we see this is moving very quickly. We are asking for a really sort of broad regulatory framework in legislation, but the key obligations would then come in targeted service-specific codes, which would enable us to be adapting quickly to what is happening in the technology and also adapting quickly to international developments that are happening from a regulatory point of view. And it would involve consultation with the relevant, specifically designated significant influential platforms and consumers and experts, academic experts, so that we would get the regulatory obligations right and in a timely way using a code mechanism. So we have sought to address this question also in the recommendation as to the regulatory framework and the tools.
A short plug here for some work that the Tech Policy Design Centre has been doing when you're talking there about keeping on top of all of the different regulatory proposals. We've developed a Tech Policy Atlas, which is a repository. We're currently covering 36 jurisdictions, about to expand. But really it covers everything from consumer and competition through to national security, through to cybersecurity, through to digital economy. And it's an excellent resource for people who are looking to compare and contrast different approaches globally. Gina, you were talking there about the different approaches that the ACCC is proposing around competition and consumer. You also spoke at your press club address saying that the digital issues really highlight the importance and complementarity between that work. There was also this really interesting interview that Lena Khan, your counterpart at the Federal Trade Commission, gave recently with Kara Swisher on her podcast, where she was talking about the FTC as a pro-innovation agency. So I'm just wondering if you can talk, I guess it's about the regulatory philosophy of the ACCC and how that the consumer focus, the competition focus, but also your focus on innovation as well, and how that all comes together.
Worldwide, only about half of the competition or antitrust agencies are also consumer protection agencies. And it's something that has struck me in the over 1 year that I have been in this role, how much stronger, better focused and more thoughtful the deliberations are, because the ACCC from its inception has been both a consumer protection agency and promoter of competition as an agency. And I'll give an example of it, Johanna, though it in every matter that we look at, we are keeping focused on the ways in which removing competitive impediments improve the quality, affordability of services and of choice for consumers, and therefore deliver benefits for business, for markets, and for consumers. An example is our social media services report, the one that we released in March this year. That covered not only looking carefully at the competitive questions, the new entry, TikTok, as critically as one example, but carefully analysed looking at the closeness of competition and the continuing market power of Meta. And in looking at both Facebook and Instagram, and also looked at new business models, the growth of influencers. So it covered aspects across the competitive framework and the competitive landscape and change. But in addition, we particularly looked at the implications for consumers, the benefits that consumers are getting, but also the aspects that are occurring through, for example, the focus, the amount of users through the designs in the platforms to keep users using the platforms on screen and in effect using our behavioural implications and psychological assumptions and framings in order to draw us, and particularly in younger demographics, to more and more time on screen. The way in which it entrenches and reinforces at times polarised ways of thinking. We had interesting submissions from bodies representing young people who have eating disorders, for instance, and the way in which social media impacts are reinforcing vulnerabilities and playing upon vulnerabilities. So it is a report that you would only get from an agency that has both a competition focus and a consumer focus, overall looking not only at welfare in an economic sense, but in a broader social sense. In terms of innovation, many in the tech sector, particularly large global incumbents, will say that regulation impedes innovation. What the ACCC is drawing out, and our report 5 in September last year was a good example, is that actually when you have a concentration of ownership, and particularly in the way we are seeing the large global digital platforms expanding out across the ecosystem, so not only holding power in the specific segments of original services that they offered, but using self-preferencing and other means to expand into adjacent services, so that you have a situation where even without, and they also engage in acquisition of new entrants or nascent competitors in particular adjacent sections, you actually have a situation that removes the capacity for innovation across very diverse and new entrants, and all of the benefits that can arise from that, from competition producing innovation and greater choice across the tech sector because of that ability to constrain and impede the entry and the expansion and the access to followers, users on the platforms, given the stature that they have now reached.
Let's dive a little bit down into the recommendations you've made around unfair trading practices. I thought it was really interesting in the press club speech that you gave that you're very clear about saying that the ACCC understands the significant benefits that digital platforms provide, but as you've said, that there's this range of conduct that does create widespread competition and consumer harms. The bit I was most interested in what you had then said was that many of these harms cannot be adequately addressed by Australia's current laws. And this is why your ACCC has put forward and proposed this economy-wide prohibition against unfair trading practices, among many of the other recommendations, and also strengthening unfair contract terms. Can you perhaps, just for the listeners who aren't lawyers, give an example of what you mean by unfair trading practices? And then could you explain a little bit about why you think the current laws that we have are insufficient or not fit for purpose?
One good example that many people will have faced, what is frequently called a subscription trap. So we will have been offered a either free period to come on to a new online service or a discounted period. And then it will return to, at the end of that period, a full subscription paying basis. In order to first open the account and come on, we will have given a credit card means of payment. You have an absolute right in the terms, so it would not qualify as an unfair term. We have a right to terminate the subscription. However, the process of the way the subscription is established, virtually impossible to exercise that right to terminate.
I'm laughing because my husband would be saying, yes, Johanna does not terminate in the background. Sorry, Gina, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, Johanna, my family has had this experience. I mean, virtually, so here you are. Yeah. A judge would look at the terms. Yeah. They would say, oh, there's a right to terminate. But it's impossible. Nobody will ever pick up the phone and then terminate. There isn't an easy click and you terminate. You could click and sign on, but you can't click and terminate. So the actual practice and process of the business, and as we are all now, over 75% of our transactions are occurring in an online environment, the ease of becoming committed and giving the payment mechanisms, but the difficulty of terminating that subscription is actually it's not just frustrating, it is causing financial loss for people who need to no longer have an interest, or actually because of their financial circumstances need to reduce the expenditure.
And so the proposal that you have on the table about an economy-wide unfair trading practices, and you also referred earlier to the different codes. Can you just maybe talk us through that proposal and what the recommendations are for competitive and fair digital platform services that were in your last report?
So the first recommendation is an economy-wide unfair trading practices prohibition, and that the ACCC has been advocating for a number of years. We reference it particularly in the digital platforms and tech context because there are so many examples in the online environment. Others include sort of false warnings of scarcity, stopwatches that are pressing people to purchase quickly, false representations of price discounts when actually the price was never at the higher price. There are just so many examples in an online environment. They do exist in a bricks and mortar and non-online environment. So we are looking for a broad, general unfair trading practices prohibition. There is one of this nature in multiple jurisdictions. The Europeans in many ways have led, but in multiple jurisdictions. And we would give guidance. We would indicate the manner of practices that we see are problematic, but it would also press businesses to have higher standards in this regard, to not only consider their terms, but to consider their business process and practices, and are they fair to their customers, so to consumers as a whole. In addition, though, we are looking at a very specific set of protections for consumers. So there are notice and action obligation. So when notice is given of a scam or notice is given of fake reviews, that there is an obligation to take action to take them down promptly in relation to prevent the biggest risks of scams losses. So $1.5 billion losses in the past year from investment scams, that the platforms would have the obligation to do verification of identity of parties, particularly parties who are putting up advertising on the platforms for financial products, that there would be requirement to do this, basically know the advertiser coming onto the platform, to check them against various regulatory and other registers in order to ensure that it is a legitimate party, because frequently they are not, and it produces a strong contribution to the level of losses from scams, and then also a mandatory requirement to have dispute resolution processes. Currently, we have consistent feedback from small businesses and consumers that they are enabled to get engagement when they have a problem they have a dispute, they have a question, they have a loss, and so that there would be mandatory dispute resolution processes and also an external independent ombuds who those disputes could be taken to if it wasn't internally resolved. So it's a set of protections that we think are really quite urgent to be put in place legislatively across digital platforms, regardless of size. It is in relation to the competition areas of protections and measures that we are looking at a much more targeted approach, so that there would be a legislative framework that would allow service by service binding codes of conduct, which only designated digital platforms. So the largest, most influential digital platforms would be designated, and then the code would only apply to their offering of services, which is informed, Johanna, by that question about innovation. We don't want to throw a blanket over the whole industry and the whole sector. We want, in terms of these competitive measure obligations, that they're targeted only at those that are the largest, most influential and are capable of exercising market power, and that would then address issues like anti-competitive self-preferencing, the sort of exclusive pre-installation agreements that are had with the OEMs, the device manufacturers, so that many users may not be aware that it's a pre-installed web browser or search machine rather than an ability to make a choice.
And would the intention be that those codes are designed and overseen by the ACCC?
The answer to that is, in most instances, yes, that we would build upon having carefully undertaken with consultation as a design process, so that across the whole sector, there would be the ability for stakeholders to consult and give submissions, and then to ensure that the framing and the design meets the needs, and including consumer needs and small business needs. And we would then bring our capacity not to monitor and report, but also to enforce. And we have many decades of experience in enforcement to ensure that legal obligations, regulatory obligations are complied with.
You're listening to Tech Mirror, a podcast from the Australian National University's Tech Policy Design Centre. If you like what you're hearing, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating, or even better, leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. Now, enough interruptions from me. Let's dive back into this episode. So, Gina, we've been talking in a bit of a deep dive about various different aspects of the ongoing inquiry. Maybe if we just take a step back, which is probably where I should have started. In fact, it was where I intended to start, but we delved down the flow of the conversation. The reports that we're talking about are part of a series of reports. Most people probably heard, because it was quite big in 2019 when the first of these reports came down, which led to the media bargaining code, the sort of face-off with Facebook and Google. But this body of work is ongoing. It will go to the Treasurer in 2025. You're putting out these reports basically every 6 months. And shout out here in particular to Kate Reader and her team who lead that work. I mean, it's just the tempo and the quality of the work that they're putting out is extraordinary. We've touched on some of the reports, so things like private messaging apps, search and browsers, online retail, social media. What is one of the things that you wish people like me or politicians paid more attention to in the process of this inquiry? Because there's obviously the things that people always pick up and focus on in the media. What would you encourage us to focus more on?
Thanks for that question, Johanna, and also thank you. And I want to add my shout out that Kate Reader's team is a remarkable team with just huge capability, commitment, dedication. When I look at what are ones that we wish received greater attention, I think a critical point here to look to is firstly the operation across in the control and the desire to control the ecosystem as a whole. So to not just look service by service, but to look at the business model and strategy and the way in which, through a combination of self-preferencing, acquisition, the overall business model, deep granular data, which is then able to be used to see what are the searches done, the purchases made, where are the areas of new services that would be able to increase user engagement and therefore the ability to earn return from users' screen time, let's put it that way, but that's not really capturing the screen time and purchasing, which will then in a forward way help inform strategically the areas that the platforms move into, because they have a forward-looking ability to gauge where it is the best way to next develop the business. So the report that we are currently working on, our 7th report, is looking at this question of the ecosystem business strategy, what it means, how it's engaged in. And so I actually think, Johanna, you already are, as indeed the atlas you were talking about, you are already looking for the overall picture and the overall impact. Yeah. And we are finding that that is a very important aspect, that in some ways, at times, people can get, in effect, locked into a sort of vertical by vertical analysis without seeing how it all is integrated and reinforces the harms in various respects.
I'm going to change tack now and talk a little bit about the topic du jour, artificial intelligence. The Federal Trade Commission and many of its regulators in the US have come out with specific statements about, in effect, putting the makers of artificial intelligence on notice that they're being watched, particularly around unfair and claims that they may or may not be able to substantiate. Is the ACCC looking at AI, and is this something that you are focused on, concerned about? How is this issue being treated for you?
Is a rapidly developing area, and as you're noting, Johanna, certainly du jour, with a lot of focus. We're actively considering it and we're monitoring it, and think it is a great example of where the regulatory reform recommendations we published last year would be well capable and important to have in place. So in terms of the safeguards from a consumer point of view, to the extent to which, and we can see this capacity, that AI can introduce or exacerbate a range of risks to consumers, increased exposure to scams, or all of that replicating voice, for example, and incorrect information and misinformation, the consumer safeguards would be very valuable to have those obligations in place so that they were taken into account by the companies as they deploy AI, as we all know is currently already happening here in Australia as well, so that they would need to take into account the safeguards in design. And then in addition, it's another great example of rapid development where the capacity to have codes would be helpful. The other way in which, we're also very focused here on an issue that we have brought out in a number of the inquiries, ad tech, for example, search, for example, in terms of, given the role of data as an input into AI and the vast data held by the largest digital platforms, it is clearly part of where will advantage sit in the companies that will be best able to deploy and exploit AI because of that engagement with the data, huge bodies of data and granular, very specific data that they hold. We are not only looking at this ourselves, you will be aware with the ACMA OAIC, an e-safety commissioner, and us. And we have a digital technology working group, and we are chairing that working group. It's currently exploring regulatory implications of large language models, so LLM. So we are looking very specifically at that question. We are doing workshops together to share our experiences, to obtain briefings about where the technology is moving, and we're doing that with experts from academia and from industry.
When we talk about the regulation of AI, one of my, bugbears around it is that there still seems to be this conversation about artificial intelligence as something specific, when actually artificial intelligence is many, many different types of technology that are used in particular ways. The ACCC takes a largely technology neutral approach to the work that you do. Is this something that you think is important and will continue to be a feature of the ACCC's approach?
It is. And it is why we prefer to have economy-wide laws and the unfair trading practices prohibition, for instance, so that there aren't arguments and frankly, at times, avoidance mechanisms for industries or applications to say that they're in or they're out. And we are always looking at, from a technologically neutral perspective, at the function, the benefits, and the potential harms of technology. We do, however, recognise at times that market failures only exist in relation to a specific service, industry, technology, particularly relating if it is, we are seeing market concentration and power reflected in particular providers, but we start with a technology neutral basis, and we do so to ensure that firstly we're properly informed, we're reading it properly, but also that the regulatory framework won't create an uneven playing field, and also won't create opportunities or incentives for avoidance.
To what extent is your cooperation with international partners a learning experience versus a practical, actual cooperation leading to action, I guess?
It's both, and it's really valuable. So it's happening matter by matter. So transactions that are globally proposed acquisitions that will also take place in Australia, we will be engaging with the competition authorities in each of the key jurisdictions where the transaction is occurring, and our teams will be speaking regularly. We also have very tech-focused ongoing close relationships, particularly with a number of leading agencies globally with a tech focus. So that includes the UK CMA, which has a very capable core data division, and also with the Dutch. And there, our technology teams and data analytical teams are sharing the ways in which we are using AI in some respects in interrogating. So as you're saying, Johanna, there are multiple different applications for this in an investigative sense, but also we have shared code that engaged in web scraping in order to do particular analysis, and we shared that code with some agencies, and they share code that they are developing with us. So we have quite specific engagements, and then we have broader engagements. We are together in a body that is called the Five Eyes.
Has anyone heard of it?
I mean, frankly, my husband, you talk to, also says to me, why isn't it at least 10 eyes? But still, the point is why these come together. So it's Australia, the US, Canada, New Zealand. We are all common law jurisdictions. That does frame the way in which our laws will be framed and the way enforcement will occur. But we are looking at a number of digital aspects there, and we meet regularly where we look at the problems we're observing, the capacity of an enforcement model in a common law jurisdiction to respond and manage it. And as we are, and the UK currently is, because the bill entered in the UK Parliament in the last few weeks, to have, in fact, a framing very similar to our recommendations. And we had kept very close to key jurisdictions as we were framing the recommendations. But theirs is looking at across and wide, economy-wide consumer protections, and then a targeted code-specific approach. It appears to have bipartisan support. It's at a legislative House of Commons committee assessment process currently. So we are keeping close both on what we can learn in a technology sense with our technology teams speaking to each other, and how we can apply it to our own investigative processes and analytical processes. Then we do it relevantly, matter by matter, and more broadly, we're looking at how we are all assessing and where the right regulatory measures and tools can be.
What advice would you give to people who want to work in this field but may sometimes be daunted at the scale and scope, or feel that there's, the task is so large that it's difficult to know where to start?
It's a really great question, I think, Johanna. And I come back to use the sorts of, your atlas is a great example, and to use, whether through podcasts or blogs, there are great ones that will give a brilliant scanning of what is happening, so that people don't need to feel they need themselves to capture everything and put it all together. So that way there are such wonderful resources available to get that overall picture, so that you don't need to spend your time doing that. And I am assisted in that very much by that our team is engaged with these methods all the time, and then distill an overall picture and change for me. So I'm deeply grateful for and reliant on that. The really important point is then what you focus on. For the ACCC, we're informed by harms and where we have the current powers to act and where we need more powers to act, and also by the need to provide to government through the reports a capture of the areas that are important to Australian consumers and the Australian economy. So that gives us our focus. But for others, it is actually a huge opportunity. It's incredibly exciting, the developments here, and it produces opportunity, including for us here in Australia, to find areas of interest, because the area of change produces the opportunity to make a difference, actually, to be engaged in an area, to cast a light on what's occurring, to consider a new service, new innovation. There have been great examples. They're now sort of incredibly well developed, but Atlassian, manifestly incredibly well developed. Canva, now they're hugely successful. But the point is, Australia has the capacity and Australians have the capacity to be innovative, having focused on an area of need that's not being met, or an area that is being met but not well.
I think that's excellent advice. Don't feel you need to know everything. Choose your bit and engage. And I definitely second that.
Exactly.
The final question we always ask is, and you spoke there about, you don't need to know it all, find the resources that are useful to give you that breadth. Are there any particular resources, apart from your wonderful team, that unfortunately we don't all have access to, although their reports are excellent, so I guess we do by proxy. Any recommendations that books or blogs you mentioned that you go to?
Looking at more in a focused way, sort of technology policy issues and developments. You previously referred to Kara Swisher, and so I find really valuable the Pivot podcast. Also the Platform Law blog. So that just gives us this sort of UK EU perspective, and so much really groundbreaking is happening with the EU, DMA, DSA, and if this UK legislation is passed, and it looks likely the UK will be the next to move into this ex-ante approach, which we really are favouring, as you can see in our competition recommendation. And then we find just excellent the information and also the Decoder podcast. So while probably the most jaw-dropping, I think one might say, elements that came this week was actually in the testimony in the Senate inquiry relating to AI, and these sort of moments of self-admission of what the possible impacts of AI would be from a founder and developer. You do through that podcast, actually interviewing tech CEOs, hearing people talk about what they're doing and why and what their rationale is does give a lot of insight. So we find that valuable in the way you are doing through this podcast series, Johanna. It just, when people speak, you learn what's really motivating them, and it helps understand and gives colour and movement to what's happening. It's very important to be engaged with it.
Thank you so much. That is a treasure trove of recommendations there. Thank you so much, Gina, for your time and for sharing the ACCC's priorities. We really appreciate it and look forward to working with you and your team on this very, very important work.
Thank you, Johanna, and it's great to have the engagement that you have with our team. I thank you for it, and also for this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you so much. Tech Mirror is a podcast of the Tech Policy Design Centre at the Australian National University. This episode was recorded on Ngunnawal lands with sound engineering by ANU Studio. Amy Denmead provided invaluable research support. Post-production is by Martin Franklin from East Coast Studio. Thanks for listening. Get in touch and get involved.